The age-old question, gameplay versus story. This rant was supposed to come after the Games Are Not Movies one, but stuff that pissed me off decided to happen. I also realized that I thought that I had this rant mostly written, so I played Overwatch all weekend the week before this video's release, only to realize that early Monday morning, I had Bupkis written. I wrote the rant about the CSGO Lotto and gambling thing, and I didn't even care about the whole situation. But that's explained in the previous rant. So what is more important, gameplay or story? It's actually a really interesting debate if you think about it. It's easy to say that gameplay is the more important factor of a game. Otherwise, the game is unplayable, and that's the point of a game, to play for entertainment. I love Overwatch. It's really fun with how all the characters control and play, and while there is a story, nothing's really divulged. Whenever Widowmaker kills a Reaper, she says that a legend falls, referring to who Reaper really is. Winston and Genji talk about old times. I'm really interested in the game's story, but it's a pain in the ass to understand why we're capturing or attacking points on a map or escorting a car from point A to point B. I'm not only invested in the game, I'm invested in the characters and the world that Overwatch takes place in. I want to see more because this looks like a really interesting world to get to know. Overwatch focuses on gameplay over the story, but yet there's games that focus more on story than the gameplay. RPGs, for example, greatly focus on the story over the gameplay because an RPG is all about the adventure. An RPG's gameplay can get really boring really quick. A classic turn-based JRPG will have you cycling through menus as you wander through a large map and fighting random battles. Even a Bethesda RPG has you going around attacking various enemies. You're just not going to go through menus constantly. You're doing it in real time unless you're crafting things. Which is probably why there's fast travel systems, so this way you don't get bored walking from place to place. Because I remember getting really bored in games like Final Fantasy VII when I was walking from location to location, and I was grateful for when I finally got the high wind. Or look at games like Uncharted that have a very heavy emphasis on storytelling. At the game's core, it's a cover-based third-person shooter with platforming and puzzle solving. So you're going to be doing the same thing from beginning to end. Without a story and well-written characters to explain what you're doing along the way, it's going to be a very boring game. The dialogue between the characters makes you invested in them to see everything through to the end. The story has to keep you invested for the 8-hour or more so ride that you're going to be part of. Otherwise, you'll get bored with it and put it away. Unless it's a shut your brain off type of game like a Sonic or Mario game where there's little to no story and it's all gameplay focused. It's why Sonic games have been having much more simple storylines. There's no need for a big long explanation. Eggman is a bad guy, go stop him. That's all you need to know. You don't need to see the history of a water monster or an ultimate life form or a sun god. But there's games like Mighty Number 9 where the story is boring as fuck. The characters are written poorly, and Dr. White, a character that will be brought up in the rant about boring characters, is the single most disinterested person in the events of the game that I've ever seen. But the game itself is fun enough to see it through to the end. I'll admit, I find the gameplay of Bethesda games like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls series to not be all that entertaining. There's some exciting bits like fighting a dragon or a deathclaw, but for the most part I feel like I'm not really doing anything. Go into a dungeon, fight a boss, travel around, doing quests, but the story is what got me invested in them. I like the story of Skyrim. I got invested in the main story quest to the point where I got lost, and I was enjoying myself in the story. I got invested with a Soul Survivor's quest to find his or her son. I could not see the first Xenosaga through to the end. It bored the utter bejesus out of me. The gameplay wasn't exciting for turn-based combat, the story was boring, and I actually fell asleep playing the game several times. Back in the cartridge days, you didn't need to worry about story because the technology wasn't as advanced as it is now. There were memory concerns that needed to be taken into account, so the story was put in the instruction manual. They also focused on the gameplay, but as technology advanced, they were able to add in more and more, so they were able to flesh out their worlds. But nowadays, you can sit through a bad story if the game is fun to play, but you can also sit through a badly programmed game if the story gets you really invested in it. But it also works the opposite way. Sometimes you'll stop playing a well-programmed game because the story is so incredibly boring, or stop playing a game with an awesome story because it's badly programmed. So that begs the question, what's more important, gameplay or story? In my opinion, they're equally important, especially nowadays. And it seems that most game developers are seeing that as well, needing to make the gameplay fun and exciting, but also paced well with the story so that the player isn't too overwhelmed. For example, I like the Uncharted series. The characters and stories are fun, but with Uncharted 1 and 3, I thought that the fights dragged on way too much, especially Uncharted 3's pirate ship area, which had me asking myself, wait, why am I here again? But I feel that Uncharted 2 had the better balance, which is why I find it to be the best one of the PS3 trilogy. I still haven't played Uncharted 4 yet, so I can't tell you what I think of it. And while I think gameplay and story are equally important, there are exceptions, of course. So it's clearly a case-by-case basis. Mascot platformers like Sonic and Mario need to focus on gameplay over story. Stylish action games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry should also focus on gameplay. RPGs need to focus more on deep stories to keep the player invested, like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls series. They're notoriously buggy, but the stories keep you invested enough to see it through. I've known people that took time off of work just to play Fallout 4. Third-person action games like Uncharted need to have a balance because if you get a good story, you need to balance it out with gameplay so the player isn't overwhelmed with too much action or bored with too much story. But it also comes down to the player themselves and what they're looking for. Sometimes you're going to want a really good story and let gameplay take the backseat, which is probably why Telltale is doing so good with its point-and-click series of games. And we all know why Call of Duty is popular, as there's people that like its gameplay. At least I'm guessing that's why people still like it.